absolute need for for office space is going to shrink, and that most most far-sighted businesses are now planning with an eye towards building in at least flexible work and some measure of hybrid work into sort of their basic business models.
Right.
I think that everyone is still trying to figure out what good offices will look like in the future.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Intelligent Community, the podcast of the Intelligent Community Movement. I'm Lou Zaccarella, a founder of the Intelligent Community Forum. This special podcast series, The Moment of Truth, From Smart to Intelligent, is brought to you by the members of ICF and the city of Dublin, Ohio, host of the 2022 ICF Summit on October 26th. Thank you. Well, the last time today's guest joined us, the pandemic had not reached us. The world was frantically spending its hours at work, literally at work. There seemed to be no limit to the amount of time people were willing to spend to upset the balance of their lives. At the time, this Silicon Valley veteran and scholar was making the claim that the secret to productivity was not longer hours, kind of heresy at the time, but we bought into it. And then we all got sick, and well, look at where we are. So who would have ever dreamed of something called the Great Resignation? Well, probably Alex Pang, for one. You remember our discussion with him back in 2019. He foretold much of the current discussion about the changing nature of work, which for certain is undergoing a moment of truth. Since that time, he has become the global programs and research manager for 4-Day Week Global. That's a nonprofit devoted to advancing the 4-day work week. Alex continues to speak around the world about deliberate rest through his company, Strategy and Rest. His work, as this is going to refresh you on this, his work includes 4 books, including Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, and The Distraction Addiction, which for my money is the most relevant title in modern communications history. His enlightened notions about the reality of our lives and our work are written about everywhere, from Scientific American to the Wall Street Journal to the South China Morning Post. If you need more credentials, Professor Alex Pang holds his PhD in the history of science from the University of Pennsylvania. I'm going to ask him how or if his research is or will have an impact on cities, especially small to mid-sized cities, which have always offered more of a balance, like our new top 7 cities, for example, and what has happened to the psychology of work and the nature of work overall, and how do his theories, which are proving to be true, fit into this pattern. Enough said. You get the picture. I'm a big fan of Alex Sojung Kim Pang. Alex, welcome back to the Intelligent Community.
Oh, thanks very much, Lou. It's great to be back with you.
Well, it's great to see you. First, I just been dying to get you on and to ask you your view of this Great Resignation, which I referred to, and what you see as its most significant and perhaps even permanent outcomes, good and bad, as it relates to some of the research and work you've been doing.
For me, I think that the most important part of the Great Resignation is the degree to which it illustrates how the place of work in our lives seems to be changing. Right, and the last couple of years have been a real wake up call for, I think, all of us to, both as individuals but also as organizations, to think differently about where work fits into a meaningful life, a satisfying life, and also how much work is necessary in order to enhance the quality of our lives. We have seen businesses make more profound changes more quickly in the early days of the pandemic than many of them ever thought possible. It has, I think, for a lot of us also forced us to either given us an opportunity to think differently about and to experiment with different kind of rhythms of work. It's highlighted the challenges, the amount of labor that we have had to invest in sort of knitting together work lives, personal lives, family, keeping all of that stuff operating well. And I think that that what we all are looking for now is a way of we're getting back to work that does not just sort of you know put us back to the normal of 2019 with all of the sort of limitations and challenges that it had, but rather figuring out new ways, new kind of balances of time and of work and of workplaces that are more satisfying, that sort of give us more meaning and allow us to have better lives. And so I think that that's what's behind the Great Resignation, and I hope that in the course of it that it sort of spurs enough thinking or sort of innovation so that we can find some answers that work for lots of us.
Yeah, you use an interesting phrase, Alex. I think it was the rhythms of work. Rhythm assumes something sort of melodic that flows together, right? So you're taking disparate elements of something and somehow now making them more coherent. And is it your view that there was something disjointed about work, the way it was sort of evolving in the workplace and the offices and so forth? We were trying to balance too many things, and it may have stressed us. And if so, how are you coming about those new rhythms? By working less, by having more time? What's it mean to you?
Well, I think that the sort of what we have, I think what sort of the last couple of years have shown all of us is that there was an awful lot of sort of invisible labor, as sort of sociologists and labor people like to call it, that went into sort of making work life and home life and family life sort of cohesive and harmonious, right? That this
Right.
was not simply a matter of sort of having distinct times for each of them and you should and going from the one place to the other, but there's an awful lot of work that was required to at the logistical level to get kids off to places, organize activities while also or fulfilling one's duties as sort of an employee or as a professional, and that and somewhat like the apocryphal story of the boiling frog. We had all come to spend an awful lot of energy doing all that work, especially
Right.
parents and most especially I think working mothers, without quite noticing just how much labor was absorbed by it. I think
And
also
what it was
that
doing to us, and what it was
yes,
doing to us, right? Because I recall you last time talking more about the neuroscience of what happens when we get that stressed.
right. I think that the that yeah, and so there were consequences not just sort of for not just for kind of our sort of fatigue levels or such, but it really
Right.
does have a negative impact on our physiology and our brains. But I think also that we've that in terms of thinking about what we can, sort of what we can do in response, once we've realized that this is an awful lot of work, and also that, having had this kind of moment of realizing that, as Sarah Jaffe puts it, work doesn't love us back, that, the sort of psychological investment in sort
Mm.
of labor or jobs isn't quite returned or pays off in the way that perhaps it once did when people had lifetime employment or career ladders were a lot more stable. And I think that that movements like the 4-day week constant or at least are trying to create space in which people can explore alternatives, can think about different ways of organizing their work, of in the case of the 4-day week, organizing both their work days and their work weeks to help work become more effective when people are at work, to build better boundaries between work life and home life, which we know are good not just for kind of finding sort of new meaning in our lives or exploring sort of new opportunities, but also simply better for recovery. right? For
Yeah.
having the quality of downtime necessary to recharge the mental and physical batteries that you need in order to do a good job. And I think finally, I think that there were sort of spatial experiments, right, with sort of work from home, with hybrid work, that are trying to sort of trying to figure out a better balance between sort of both the opportunities that many of us, at least knowledge workers, have to work in a variety of places that may be better suited to different kinds of work that we engage in,
Hmm.
or different kinds of cognitive activity, and to figure out how to take advantage of that in ways that serve both us and that work well for companies and or for economies as a whole.
Right. Now, I want to clarify for myself and hopefully for my audience. We're not talking necessarily about that person like Nick the Greek. You don't know Nick the Greek. He's a contractor out here where we live. He absolutely, Alex, he's about 80 years old. He absolutely loves what he does. This guy does not think of what he does as work. He just loves just doing what he does. We're not talking about Nick the Greek, are we? We're talking about the person, as you said, who just isn't getting, he or she is not getting the reward. And they've somehow bought into a mythology of work versus getting the pleasure from it. Is that a fair distinction?
I think it's aimed more at the second, but I do think that there are lessons that leaders who move their companies to 4-day weeks offer for all of us. Whether
Mm,
we see ourselves already as super passionate about our work and would describe our days as as ones in which we are, in which the work doesn't feel like work. I think that it is all too easy these days to think of to proceed from that to the assumption that if you really love what you do, if it doesn't feel like work, then there's nothing wrong with doing it, all the time,
right.
with allowing it to take over our lives. And I think though, that if you really enjoy what you do, if you're really passionate about it, then you might also think about being able to do it for, most of your life, being able to do it for decades, right? Rather than intensively for a few years at the risk of burning yourself out.
Right. Right.
And that part of what we are trying to figure out is how we can work in ways that allow us to express that passion in a more, in a sense, kind of more moderated, sustainable way. So that our relationships with sort of work and workplaces go from being something like, sort of tempestuous romances to something more akin to stable marriages, right? These are
Right.
both,
Good analogy.
these are things that have somewhat
Yeah.
different kinds of emotional resonances, as any of us who live long enough will discover. But there is an awful lot to be said for the second, even though we tend to write a lot more songs and make movies about the first.
Right. So
So yeah.
so again, it's really about bringing some balance into this whole discussion. As you've also said, building a world where we work to live,
Yes.
not live to work. And it sounds, like a wonderful phrase, and everybody kind of knows what it means. And conceptually, many of us will buy into it. But in terms of what it really delivers, the consequences of it, quote, consequences are better mental health, more social capital created, right? And maybe even more coherent policies for running a city, maybe even less crime, maybe even better mental health, those types of things. First of all, do you agree, or have I gone way out on the branch here on your work? And secondly, is there any data right now to back that up, that perhaps places where these policies, and we'll get to the 4-day week shortly, where these policies may have been implemented in some fashion, are actually showing the kind of results you and I would expect?
Really interesting question, and I think that the answer is that there is there is data that would point to improvements in things like civic life, civic engagement, sort of the amount of connectedness between people. No one, however, has tried to either sort of measure that stuff at the community or city level.
Mm.
And the experiment, and the other limiting factor is that sort of experiments in things like hybrid work and shorter work weeks are things that generally have taken place at the sort of company or enterprise or kind of government level, as opposed to across an entire sort of across an entire sort of polity. Having said that, I think there is plenty of sort of anecdotal and a certain amount of sort of survey evidence that tells us that, when people get more time from sort of shorter work weeks or hybrid work, etc., they don't just sort of fritter it away like binging Netflix, even though that's sort of kind of what I do with some of it. They
Me
spend
too.
more time with family. They spend more
Mm.
time doing volunteer work, doing community things. And they also have more time for what the Brits call life admin, waiting for the scheduling doctor's appointments and doing repairs around the house and that sort of stuff. And so it's more time for the labor intensive or emotionally intensive work of or building and maintaining, whether it is families, houses, communities, etc.
Right.
And likewise, at the government level, we have seen some interesting indicators that, if properly designed, you can have shorter work weeks in a civil service that can make for both sort of more robust provision of services, happier government workers, without any and have that without any sacrifice of level of service or level of care on the part of the public. So I think that what this points to is there's some really interesting opportunities for the design of programs or policies, especially I think at or the city or sort of small region level, that I'm just waiting for some far-sighted mayor or local leader to pick up and develop and take advantage of.
Well, Alex, we've got about 200 of them that follow us. Maybe you should be talking to them. Maybe Strategy and Rest should be talking to them. Um, and I'm serious about that, of course. I also wanted to address how revolutionary some of your thinking is, because I think what scares some people is that, gee, if he's right, this changes the whole economic paradigm. And I'm thinking about, again, a young woman I know, friend of a friend, um, who is working with a company, and they're asking her to come back 3 days a week into a physical office. And this is a really, really talented young woman. And she basically told me over the weekend, she says, look, Uncle Louis, if they do that, I'm going to look for another job. I am not going back into that office. And I'm thinking, okay, so the commercial real estate people in New York, who have more empty real estate space than the entire city of St. Louis right now, what happens to that economic paradigm? And I know that you're working on a new concept about why offices still matter. And I may be getting over my skis here because I know it's early stage for you, but I wanted to just address that issue with you.
I am challenged to sort of to come up with a scenario for the future of work in which commercial real estate comes out better than, or sort of better in 2023 than it was in January 2020.
Mm.
Most of the conversations I've had with sort of people who are working in this space, and sort of my own thinking, indicates that this market is, and the whole world of commercial real estate is going to change pretty dramatically. That the absolute need for office space is going to shrink, and that most far-sighted businesses are now planning with an eye towards building in at least flexible work and some measure of hybrid work into sort of their basic business models.
Right.
I think that everyone is still trying to figure out what good offices will look like in the future. Right? Nobody, I think, nobody buys the idea that once you get above a certain size, or in most kinds of businesses, that you won't need dedicated space. You won't
Right.
need to bring together people. There's an awful lot of good reasons for having those. The thing, however, what I think is going to go away and not come back is the prevalence of, the open span office in which people, that are essentially kind of sort of amplifiers of distraction, in which you've got sort of people in largely undifferentiated spaces, who are warehoused for 8 hours a day. That model is what I think when people don't want to go back to the office, I think that's what they don't want to go back to.
Right.
You know,
Got it.
the idea of spending time with friends, of being in spaces that do a good job of supporting work, and in particular supporting kinds of work that they can't do, let's say at home or at a favorite cafe. Those sorts of spaces are very appealing, but I think
Right.
too few of us can look forward to those right now.
Alex, have you seen any models in that sector, in the real estate sector, that you like? You said, that is closer to the research and the work that I do than anything I've seen so far.
It is so early that it's
Hmm.
difficult to point to a particular, to a place or a company that's doing it well. I
Yeah.
think that there are workspaces that are more interesting and imaginatively designed, that, from which we can learn lessons. But I think we are still waiting for all this stuff to be kind of put together into a package of physical kind of, designed physical space, designed time, and technology that, that really, compellingly solves the problems
Okay.
that we're facing, and creates environments and sort of work rhythms that appeal to people and satisfy the needs of business.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Alex Pang. We'll be back with Alex next time to continue this discussion. And of course, we continue to follow up on his work and how it impacts communities. You can meet interesting people like Alex and learn from regions, cities, and towns across the world on October 26th, when the ICF Summit returns to a live venue. The venue will be the amazing city of Dublin, Ohio, a place which produces more Fortune 1000 companies on a per capita basis than any other in the USA. Being in Central Ohio, the base of Intelligent Ohio, will be a learning experience that is unique. For more information on how you can register at no cost, visit icfsummit.com. It's a great place to do business with cities and investors. Learn about the ICF method for helping cities thrive by following us on Facebook and Twitter at New Communities and Lou ICF. For the Intelligent Community Podcast, our producer Matt Owen and Alex Pang, I'm Lou Zaccarella, reminding you that there really is no place like home. Take care, everybody.